So part of growing up for Pi also means facing things that are some things that scare you. So he's going to have to face his fear. And in terms of his personal growth, he has to deal with conflicts. So there are external conflicts, things in his physical reality that are obstacles that he has to overcome. Uh, Being on a life raft, I mean, the physical difficulties of sort of existing on a life raft with a man-eating tiger, that would be sort of your major obstacle here. But so there's a lot of external conflicts just surviving this environment for him, surrounded by ocean in this raft, and then the realities of sort of, you know, basic survival, having enough to drink or to eat, not drowning, all of those things that are external conflicts. He'll also face internal conflicts, um, which are, you know, based within his own feelings about the situation, dealing with his own internal issues related to isolation, meaninglessness, feelings like you're hopeless and boredom, those kind of ideas that, or those kind of feelings that result in the situation that he also has to overcome. So there's a lot of personal or internal conflict and then external conflict in the narrative as well. So another theme or idea of Life of Pi is the sort of duality of science and zoology, and how it sort of contrasts or connects with Pi's belief in spirituality and religion. So we usually think of science and religion as two incompatible things, because science is all about rational explanations, provable facts, things that you can measure and observe with your eyes and touch it and sense it and measure it and prove that it exists. So there's an element of science that is all about rational, proven facts. And then religion, on the other hand, is all about things you can't prove, things that you believe in, but you often can't see them, you can't prove they exist. So say one's belief in God, right? There is no way that it can be proven by science that God exists. Um, you can't sort of measure the presence of God with a ruler. You can't observe it with your senses and map it out. So it kind of defies our rational mind. So science and religion are often sort of at conflict with one another, and um, you kind of see a divide between those who follow scientific fact and then those who follow a kind of religious faith in the unknown. And they are often viewed as sort of contrary influences. But for Pi, he doesn't see this as a division. In fact, he is somebody who believes strongly in the power of both science and religion, and his uh, academic career sort of proves this. So right off the bat, we learn that his academic study, he's got dual majors. He wrote his dissertation, his thesis in zoology. So he'll study the three-toed sloth. So this is sort of his scientific field. He practices or studies zoology, studies the nature of animals, and does so in a kind of rational scientific way. On the other side of that, so he has a second major, which is religious studies. So he'll also study aspects of religious studies, and this is part of his secondary degree. So these two things kind of, on the surface anyway, seem to conflict, but Pi has a way of sort of bringing together things that aren't necessarily compatible on, paper, but he brings them together, and both of them help him in his narrative to survive. So he wouldn't have survived on his life raft had he not had the rational, scientific beliefs of how to exist in a day-to-day environment. And he also wouldn't have survived had he not had any sense of belief or kind of religious foundation to help support him throughout that experience. So he's kind of needs both of those things in order to survive, and he studies both things in his the rest of his life is sort of devoted to those two things. So they make up a large part of who he is. Pi's childhood is spent at a zoo. So his father owns the Pondicherry Zoo. So he grows up surrounded by animals in a zoo environment, and his narrative will also sort of take place amid a raft where he is surrounded by wild animals. And this idea of the relationship between humans and animals is very important, and there is a lot, often sort of situations or discussions where animals and humans somewhat blur, the lines between them blur. They share characteristics. And if you think about this idea of anthropomorphizing animals, which is what Pi's father will sort of give him a lesson in, we'll talk more about that in later lectures, but for now, it's just a good idea to sort of start thinking about what are the divisions between humans and animals? When do they share characteristics with one another? Um, and when do we sort of see the lines being blurred between humans and animals? So this is something to pay attention to in the early parts of the novel and throughout, as we sort of look at the lines between humans and animals and where these lines of division fall apart. So one of Pi's strongest relationships is developed with the tiger Richard Parker, which is, if we're thinking about anthropomorphized animals, the name Richard Parker is very much a human name, but that's the name of our tiger. So Pi will talk about Richard Parker throughout his narrative and sort of discuss the ways that this beast, this animal, has had such a huge impact on his life. Um, and he sort of credits the presence of Richard Parker for helping him survive all those days aboard the life raft. So there's some interesting things that the presence of this tiger allows Pi to learn about, human nature and about himself and about um, animals as well. So he sort of will learn and grow through his relationship with an animal, uh, and they develop this very important kind of bond that allows him to survive all those days aboard the life raft. Other animals also will play an important role and will shed sort of life lessons and help Pi grow and understand the nature of the world. So the hyena is one of the most brutal animals that Pi faces. And the hyena is kind of, if there's a presence of evil aboard the life raft and in Pi's sort of existence, it's sort of embodied by the hyena, who commits some very sort of atrocious death scenes, I guess, in the novel. Some of them are pretty gruesome to read, so that's just something to keep in mind when you get into part two. There's some rather disturbing uh, deaths that occur, and the hyena is the most vicious of all the predators that is sort of aboard this life raft. And it does make Pi also question sort of the creation of evil in the world. So that, all of nature's creatures are God's creatures. Why would there be something as disgusting or evil as a hyena? Um, Sort of forces him to sort of question some of his beliefs as well. So it's an interesting kind of character if you think about it in that regard. But the hyena is a very sort of influential uh, presence in Pi's growing process. On the gentler side of the animal characters in the novel, we have the orangutan, um, and she's a female. She's more of a kind of maternal figure for Pi and represents more of a sort of human or kind of a more, as close to human as sort of an animal can get. So not quite as ruthless, more softer and kinder, gentler, but still having moments of, wild animal characteristics as part of her character. So she'll also play a role within teaching Pi lessons about life and about himself and about nature. So thematically, we are dealing with a survival situation, and it forces us to think about, if you are in a survival situation, what would or wouldn't you do in order to survive? Um, what are the sort of ethics that allow somebody to survive? What do you allow yourself to do or not do in order to live one day to the next? Are there certain things that are unacceptable in this life or death situation? What is the strength of life in face of death? And are there sort of ethical or moral boundaries that are crossed in a survival situation? So this novel will sort of ask some of these difficult questions over the course of the novel. But if you think about, people who have survived, crazy like plane crashes or abandoned on, desert islands or uh, situations where you're, stranded on top of a mountain. Uh, there people do amazing things uh, in order to survive. So there's always this life force that is compelling us to not give up, not uh, allow life to, give in to death. There's always this life force compelling us to live to the next day. And some people will do whatever it takes in order to survive. So it's sort of surprising in some cases what a person is willing to do in order to extend their life. And I think, something sometimes surprising, sometimes forces us to sort of question whether we are capable of doing something in the same way that the characters are forced to do something. So it's kind of this question of ethics as well that will surface over the course of this survival scenario. So in terms of the structure of our narrative, there is a sort of different levels of the story. So we do have a kind of framing story. So you have to read the author's note in order to get the framing story. But this is kind of Martel narrating, sort of writing himself into the fictional aspects of the story. So it's a bit of a metafiction in this regard. Um, and he's sort of describing where he first heard of Pi during his travels through India. And he learns of Pi's very